Michael on the way by to tell him that I have the same carburetor story. Clearly, neither of us. I was talking about intelligent design, and I showed a slide that showed this incredible number of pieces of stuff on somebody's garage floor. And I said, the idea of intelligent design is that all of these disassembled pieces were all put together at one time, you know, like a carburetor. And afterwards, somebody came up to me and said, cars don't have carburetors. So I really appreciate it. I'm with you, my friend. I'm with you. You know, we could, you know, you and I are on the lecture circuit to some degree. We might be able to find how many people are clueless about cars like you and I. Well, I could not be more delighted to be part of this symposium. This is a wonderful opportunity to visit Montreal, which is always a wonderful thing to happen to anybody. But just a couple of days ago, I was at another conference in Seattle and happened to mention to my friend Harriet Hall that I was coming to Montreal. She said, oh, I've been to Montreal. That's really, I've been to McGill. I said, well, I'll be there for the Trottier Symposium. I spoke there a couple years ago. So she told me, she said, boy, they really treat you like a queen, too. So I am feeling treated like a queen, for sure. I'm going to talk about the people who don't accept very well-founded scientific ideas. And I'm going to use as my examples the anti-evolutionists and the people who reject climate change. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Up here on stage, it sounds like we are being shouted at, but if you can hear me fine, we'll just go for it. Now, what do these organizations have to do with these organizations? Well, the Heartland Institute, Marshall Institute, Heritage Foundation, those at the top are a lot richer. The ones on the bottom, the creationist organizations, are a lot bigger. But they are similar in that both of them advocate ideas that are contrary to modern science. People associated with the top group propose various forms of climate change denial, and personnel from the bottom group deny that living things share common ancestors, in preference to the idea that all plants and animals, all galaxies, the whole universe was produced at one time, and that plants and animals are the result of specially created kinds. Yet both climate change and evolution are very well accepted in the scientific community. There's this really big disconnect between the general public and the scientific community. Now, clearly there are nuances for both anti-evolution and anti-climate change. It's not one size fits all. In the case of evolution, the strongest position among anti-evolutionists is to insist that nothing evolves, not plants and animals, not planets, not galaxies, not the astronomical evolution, geological evolution, biological evolution, none of it is valid. A somewhat less stringent position is that, well, the physical universe can evolve. Astronomy's okay, geology's okay, but we draw the line in biology. And the least stringent creationist position is that, well, living things evolve, all of the above, so to speak, but not humans. Drawing the lines, a human exceptionalism position. Similarly, with climate change, there are various perspectives as well. The strongest position is just to simply deny that the planet is getting warmer. This is harder and harder to maintain because, of course, the evidence for the planet warming, the oceans warming, the atmospheric warming, everything warming, is getting so unavoidable that it just gets tougher and tougher to take that strongest position. The secondary position is, well, it is getting warmer, but it's not anthropogenic. Humans are not responsible. The cause is just natural. It's the sun, or it's normal cycles, but it's not people. The least stringent position is, well, it's getting warmer, people are responsible, but there's nothing we can do about it. We can only accommodate to global change, climate change. We shouldn't do anything to restrict carbon output or anything else. We should, I guess, move all the people in Florida away from the coast. Might have to do that anyway. The agreement of scientists on the reality of evolution is very impressive. In this study from 2009, the folks from the Pew Foundation, which is a very well-respected, neutral polling agency, did a survey of American Association for the Advancement of Science members, the largest general scientific organization in the world, really. There are 60,000 members or 90,000 members, something like that. It's very large. 97% of American scientists agreed, yes, living things have common ancestors. Biological evolution has taken place. And 84% of these scientists in 2009 agreed that Earth is getting warmer because of human activity. Now I think it's safe to say that percentage of scientists agreeing that global warming is happening, human beings are responsible for the current rate of increase since the Industrial Revolution, that number's gone up. That number has actually increased. But again, there's a disconnect between the views of scientists and the views of the general public, although this varies by country. And you guys, let me show you a few numbers from some fairly recent polling data. The Canadian polling organization Angus Reid Public Opinion conducted a poll in 2010. In Great Britain, 68% of citizens agreed that humans evolved, and only 15% of Brits held to the special creation of humans position, the young Earth creationist position. But then, on the other hand, Darwin is their guy, so you'd expect them to be enthusiastic about evolution. Canada came almost as high a percentage accepting evolution, and a somewhat smaller, but still a somewhat higher, but still small 25% of Canadian citizens accepted the young Earth special creation point of view. And then we have my country, in which only 45% of the citizens accepted evolution, and a whopping 47% believe in young Earth creationism. I've done just enough survey research to know that it's really dangerous and it needs to be done by competent people, and questions have to be asked carefully. And you also want to compare data collected at about the same time, which is why I'm showing you data from 2010, because those are the most recent data that I have that reflect across nations. A 2013 survey by Angus Reid on climate change also shows a lower percentage of citizens accepting climate change than the very high percentages of scientists. Again, Canada and Great Britain do a whole lot better than my country. So why do so many people deny what scientists consider to be solid science? I'm going to present 3 ideas that I would like you to consider. At NCSE, we've thought a lot about this, given our experience in dealing with the creationism problem over the years, and we believe that the pillars of denial, as we call them, are applicable both to evolution and to climate change denial. The first pillar of denial is to question the science. The science of evolution is weak. Scientists are divided on climate change. Scientists are giving up on evolution. To question the science as a way of creating doubt in the mind of the public. Now, questioning the science is fundamental to denialism, as illustrated by this very good book by Oreskes and Conway, Merchants of Doubt. I really would recommend it to anybody. Questioning the science was a deliberate technique of the tobacco companies during the decades that public health organizations were trying to demonstrate that smoking is addictive, nicotine is addictive, there are lots of consequences for health, heart disease, as was mentioned, lung cancer, other kinds of it. It's a bad thing to do. The tobacco companies, though, claimed for decades that the science is not yet settled on the health effects of smoking. There's no consensus yet because we have our scientists saying A and you have your scientists saying B, so the jury is still out. And there are wonderful documents at Stanford University from the Freedom of Information and depositions that came during the trials of the tobacco companies during the various lawsuits against them, greatly deserved. And it's documented that tobacco company executive, deliberately lied to the public. They realized, the strategy that they set out was that if we can create doubt in the mind of the public, then we won't have to take steps that the government is trying to impose upon us, restricting advertising, being able to advertise to children. That was a particularly scary letter within the documents in the file. So, how do you make the public doubt the validity of the science? Well, a common and time-tested way is to question the science is, again, my scientists say this, your scientists say that, therefore the jury is still out. We have scientists that question the consensus. The tobacco companies, creationists, global warming deniers, all have used this technique very effectively. The Discovery Institute, which is an intelligent design promoting organization, has its list of scientists doubting Darwin. The Oregon Institute for Science and Medicine, which sounds very prestigious, but it's run by one guy and his sons, has a very impressive sounding 30,000 scientists on their equivalent position against anthropogenic climate change. Now, 30,000 scientists sounds extremely impressive, but the devil is in the details. You really have to take a look at who are on this list. Actually, quite a few people on this list are fictitious characters like Mickey Mouse, because basically they accepted everybody who came in. But it's kind of a low bar to be a scientist. It's anybody with a bachelor's degree or above. That's not hard to get 30,000 people. You could probably get 30,000 people to say the sun won't come up tomorrow if you really thought about it. And they're drawn from a very random list of scientists, including medicine, engineering, veterinary medicine, agriculture, computer science, and even some climate science, but not very many climate science scientists. The biggest category, almost 10,000 of them, was general science. So these are probably not terribly well-informed individuals. The creationist, the intelligent design scientist doubting Darwin was something that my organization was quite peeved at when they came up with this. They had 100 scientists doubting Darwin, and we thought that was pretty dumb because that's not how you decide whether a scientific idea is valid or not. You don't have scientists voting on whether they do or do not accept evolution. And our phones rang off the hook. We got lots of emails saying, NCSC should organize a petition. This is outrageous. We can get tens of thousands of scientists to sign a statement about evolution is really good science. And we said, yes, we could, but we're not going to do that because that's really dumb. It's dumb to have a statement that scientists doubt Darwin. It's dumb to have a statement that scientists accept evolution. But we did it anyway. But if I may say so, we did it with flair. We also had a statement, evolution's important, natural selection's a big deal, you should teach it in school, basically a nicely worded statement about evolution. And whereas they had 100 scientists doubting Darwin on the first round, we had 200 scientists, but all of ours were named Steve. The press liked it too. You can poke fun at things like that because it's actually pretty easy. But there was a lesson that we were trying to tell too, because 1% of American names are Steves or Stephanies. Stephanies are in there as well. And so that means our 200 scientists is worth how many of theirs? Anyway, it was quite fun. Also, when we checked their list of 100 scientists, they had one Steve. We thought that was poetic justice. But at any rate, the thing to remember about these lists of scientists on side A or side B is that the number of scientists on the anti-side is minuscule compared to the number accepting either evolution or global warming. Lawyers have a somewhat cynical statement about expert witnesses. For each PhD, there is an equal and opposite PhD. And unfortunately, many people seem to feel the same way. If there are scientists who doubt evolution, then the jury is still out. It's Richard Dawkins versus intelligent design proponent Michael Behe. Yet, for every PhD, there is not an equal and opposite PhD. The percentage of scientists denying evolution is minuscule, especially among evolutionary biologists who can speak most authoritatively on the subject. Similarly, the public thinks that if there are scientists denying global warming, then the jury is still out. It's Michael Mann versus Richard Lindzen. Yet for every PhD, there is not an equal and opposite PhD. Again, the percentage of scientists denying global warming is a tiny percentage of scientists as a whole. And it is particularly a tiny, tiny percentage of climate scientists, who of course can speak most authoritatively. I'm going to talk about other ways that rejectors of science challenge the validity of the science. I can't talk about all of them, we don't have that much time. But one of them is cherry-picking the data, a classic approach found quite frequently among the creationists, but also found, as I will show you, among the global warming deniers. Now, most of the young Earth creationist arguments against the age of the Earth are like this one. This is an article from a creationist comic book, Primal Man, in which it is related accurately that lava rocks were checked in Hawaii by the potassium-argon method. It was said they were almost 3 billion years old. But that volcano had erupted in 1801. Therefore, radiometric dating is unreliable. Therefore, the world is not ancient. Therefore, evolution didn't take place. Therefore, creationism took place. Got it?
Yes.
Sequence of events there. This is an accurate article. I mean, this is a real article from the scientific journal. It's from the Journal of Geophysical Research. I just love creationist comic books. They are the only comic books on the planet, I am sure, that have footnotes to scientific journals. There's just something wonderful about all of this. Well, this is cherry picking of data because it happens to be that this particular article by Funkhauser and Naughton, it's a legitimate article within the geological literature. It's talking about how when you date lava flows using potassium argon, you have to be very careful with your sample because within many lava flows, not all, but within some lava flows, there are these inclusions of olivine. They're a kind of crystal that comes from very, 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 very deep in the mantle, and they get hauled in along with the lava. The nature of potassium argon dating is that you date the basalt or whatever lava rock you're dealing with, granites or lava, because it had melted, and then the radiometric clock starts ticking again, and you compare potassium to argon, and you can get a good estimate as to when the lava flow took place. But if you accidentally date one of these olivine crystals, you're going to get an anomalous image that does not reflect the lava flow. So this article was all about how to do it better. It wasn't an article about flaws in radiometric dating. Classic cherry picking. One of my favorite examples of cherry picking from the climate change deniers has to do with Arctic sea ice melting. Now, the melting of the Arctic sea ice is a big deal because it's melting really fast, and the addition of Arctic ice glaciers into the ocean has the prospect of raising water levels, which is pretty important, but also the infusion of cold water into the system can change current flows, which is a really big deal, and that can have very profound effects upon climate throughout the planet. Joseph Bast is president of the Heartland Institute, and he writes, the National Snow and Ice Data Center records show conclusively that in April 2009, Arctic sea ice extent had indeed returned to and surpassed 89 levels. Well, that would be pretty good to know, because maybe we don't have to worry so much about Arctic sea ice melting. However, this is the data from 1989 and 2009 from January, February, March, April. The x-axis is just looking at these through months. And when you look at this, the red line is 09, 89. It certainly looks like there's less ice in 09 than in 89. But where's this thing about how in April of 89? In April, the lines just happened to cross. So that is the data point that he's taken out. Whereas clearly anybody who looks at the data of sea ice melting over a long period of time, it is just really, really clear. There's no debate within the scientific community that the Arctic sea ice is melting. Other things are going on in Antarctica, but that's a big deal as well. These data are the most recent data I could find, which is from August 2013. The September 2013 data are not available because my government was on strike. Don't get me started on that either. Another really egregious example of cherry picking is a common claim that you will hear over and over and over. The planet has not warmed since 1998. How many of you have heard that? Some of you are paying attention. Where's the baby? But it's a very, very common argument that anti-global warming proponents was present. We're in a period of leveling off. It's not really getting warmer. The alarmists, that's climate scientists, the alarmists are trying to mislead us. Well, indeed, if we look at from 1998 to 2008, yeah, it's cooler in 2008. And 1998 was a really unusual year for land temperature. It was an unusual El Nino Pacific warming cycle year. And looking at 98 to 2008, there is a decline in temperature. But why are these two dates chosen? If you look at 97 to 2008, there's a slight rise in temperature. And if you look at 99 to 2008, there's a rise in temperature. But there's cherry picking going on just in the choice of 98 and 2008, other than the fact that they're a decade apart. If we add on the last two, if we add on 2009 and 2010, there's actually an increase in temperature. Climate change deniers are really anxious to show that things have cooled. Aha! Looking from 1998 to 2012, it's gotten cooler again. Yeah, maybe 2011 and what was warmer, and the line would go up, but it's gotten cooler again. So clearly, we're dealing with a period of leveling off. And look at all the other examples of leveling off too. You know what the next slide is going to look like, right? Yeah, if you cherry pick the data, you can show that there's lots of examples of leveling off. On the other hand, the data starts in 1970 up until the present shows a clear warming trend. So, casting doubt upon the validity of the science is a very strong way of challenging the science. There are many other ways that the science is challenged, including attacking the integrity of scientists. Ask Michael Mann. Distracting the attention of the public with non-pertinent issues such as ClimateGate, claiming that science is dogmatic and not open to new ideas. There are lots and lots of these ways of challenging the science. But let's go on to the second pillar of denial, and this is what we call an ideological pillar. Now, people will reject different sciences because of ideological beliefs. In the case of evolution, clearly the ideology is religious ideology. In the case of climate change, however, it's a different ideology for the most part, almost entirely. It's a political ideological reasons for rejecting climate change and also economic. Let me clear up one thing about a confusion between political and religious conservatism. Religious conservatives in the United States hold certain religious views. I'm talking about Christians here. They believe in the inerrancy of the Bible. A personal relationship with Jesus is necessary for salvation. They call themselves evangelicals, fundamentalists, charismatics. There's many other terms that are used, but those are all difficult terms because they have different definitions. They prefer the term conservative Christian, which is the term I'm using here. Now, political conservatives express confidence in capitalism as an economic system. They oppose taxation. They have belief in minimal government. They elevate individuality and personal liberty to a very high state. And this is combined with the American myth of an individual everyone being able to succeed based upon their own efforts. Now, not all conservative, and the overlap of the two is right. Not all conservative Christians are political conservatives. Some of the most energetic workers for the poor and disadvantaged are social gospel evangelicals. Similarly, not all political conservatives are conservative Christians. Many of them in America, almost everybody's Christian, They are mainstream Christians. They belong to Catholic or mainstream Protestant faith. They are not members of the religious right. If we take these diagrams of conservative Christians, political conservatives, and the religious right, and we overlay anti-evolutionism, we find that anti-evolutionism primarily is a conservative Christian enthusiasm. The religious right is reliably anti-evolutionist, but not because they're politically conservative. They are reliably anti-evolutionist because they are religiously conservative. You're picking up the religious conservatism there. Similarly, some political conservatives are also anti-evolutionists, but it's because primarily they're members of the religious right, not because of their political conservatism per se. Knowing somebody is an anti-evolutionist is a pretty good predictor that they're going to be a conservative Christian. It is much less good a predictor that the person is going to be politically conservative. Okay? If we take these two diagrams, the religious conservative, political conservative, religious right, and we overlay global warming contrarianism, we find that most of the global warming objectors, I mean, I'm an objector to global warming, but I think most of the people who reject the science of global warming do so for political reasons. And of course, the religious right is reliably anti-climate change, but because they're politically conservative, not because they're religiously conservative. Okay? There's a substantial number of green Christians who are environmentalists. They favor creation care or stewardship theology rather than dominion theology, and they are outside of the anti-global warming movement. So ideologically, global warming contrarians are politically conservative rather than being religiously conservative per se. Now there is a small slice of the anti-global warming movement which are so because of religious views. It's a providential theology, the idea that God would never let anything really, really bad happen to his creation, earth, and all of the things on it. And the idea that of anthropogenic or human-caused climate change is just hubris on the part of human beings because God is almighty, God sent the flood, he is so much more powerful than human beings. But the primary motivation for those who object to global warming is political conservatism rather than religious conservatism. There's one more component to this, the comparison between the two in terms of ideology, and this is economic ideology. There's such a thing as political liberals, there's political conservatives, and then there's a funny overlap within the United States political system, people who call themselves libertarians. Now, libertarians are a kind of odd group politically because they share some interests with political liberals and some with political conservatives. Like political conservatives, libertarians are strongly anti-big government. There's a very strong libertarian streak in the Tea Party, and they strongly support individual self-reliance. But like political liberals, they value personal autonomy, they support such things as legalization of marijuana, abortion rights, gay marriage, and the like. The key characteristic of libertarians, though, is something that the investor and philanthropist George Soros has called free market fundamentalism. The idea that the free market can solve all of our problems of not just economics, but society and everything else. And many libertarians object to global warming as being an accurate science because they believe it to be a socialist attack on capitalism. As do political conservatives, they object to things like cap and trade or carbon taxes because they believe that this is an unwarranted burden to place upon the coal, gas, and oil, the carbon-producing industries. Just let the free market solve all of these problems. So there indeed are many ideological motivations for rejecting the idea of climate change. There's religious motivations, a tiny slice of it, primarily political and economic motivations, however. None of these communities, neither the global warming nor the anti-evolution communities are monolithic, which I will address next because I think that's a common misconception. There's variation among political conservatives regarding climate change, with the acceptance of climate change being higher among moderate and liberal Republicans than it is among conservative Republicans. Conservative Republicans sounds to me like a redundancy, but nonetheless. Similarly, by the way, the same sort of thing occurs with Democrats, with liberal Democrats being more likely to accept the science of climate change. Recently, past Republican Environmental Protection Agency administrators took out an ad in the New York Times, this was just last August, in support of human-caused global warming, recognizing this as valid science. So even though I am generalizing about these ideological views, please realize that they mask considerable variation. And obviously the same thing holds for religious conservatism. There is variation among religious conservatives. Some of our strongest allies are those evangelical Christians who accept evolution. But then within the Christian community as a whole, as I mentioned, and is probably well known in Catholic Quebec, Catholics routinely teach evolution in their parochial schools, both here and in the United States. And mainstream Protestants like Episcopalians, most Methodists, most Presbyterians, Episcopalians, United Church of Christ, these denominations accept what is really mainstream Christian theology, which is God created and used the process of evolution to bring about his goals. There's variation within the religious community, there's variation within the political community. So none of these things really do are well served by speaking with broad strokes, writing with broad strokes. Anyway, don't generalize. The third pillar of denial is a cultural pillar, and this is what we sometimes call the fairness pillar. The idea that out of a sense of fairness or balance, or to avoid dogma, both sides must be taught. In the educational setting, a version of the cultural or fairness pillar is that to increase the students' critical thinking, we will give them the evidence for evolution, the evidence against evolution, the evidence for global warming, the evidence against global warming, and let the students exercise their critical facilities to work out the details. The cultural pillar is, in some respects, the most difficult of all of the three pillars. I'm not going to explain why I mean that in the question period, because this is going to appeal across religion, across political perspectives. I am not a fundamentalist about anything except free speech. I mean, these are values that really resonate among all North Americans. We do believe in freedom of expression. We do believe in free speech. We do believe in these basic, in the ability to be heard. These are values worth fighting for. They're very important cultural values, but they're essentially meaningless when it comes to science. The values of balance, fairness, etc. are applicable and essential when it comes to opinions. But science is not about opinions. Ultimately, Daniel Patrick Moynihan was right. People's opinions are different from facts. Ideas like evolution and climate change that are accepted by the scientific community are accepted because they have gone through a rigorous process of sifting and winnowing of ideas. Like Michael was describing, we test ideas. We test the Jesus on them. We discard the ideas that don't work. We go back to the drawing board, try to think of a new way to test it, rinse and repeat, over and over and over. Finally, this process of lurching forward a few steps, maybe to the side a few steps, maybe back a step, lurching forward again. Finally, this process results in the majority of scientists concluding, I think this is the best explanation. We can always revise it down the lane, certainly. Maybe later on we'll find better, but a consensus and agreement among scientists does form around explanations. It's not an opinion whether the planets go around the sun or the sun goes around the planets. Heliocentrism is here to stay. But this was not an idea that some scientists just expressed an opinion about. The idea of the planets going around the sun is a very profound one, and it took hundreds of years to develop. And this is the way it is with all of these core ideas of science. The idea that humans and all other creatures share common ancestors, and that the universe, the planet, the solar system, all of the galaxies, the plants and animals on our planet, all of this has a history, that the past is different from the present, that there has been cumulative change through time. That is an idea that is so well supported in science, we're not even arguing about it anymore. We're not arguing about whether evolution took place. We argue about the details, just like planetary astronomers argue about the details of heliocentrism, but they're not really arguing about whether planets go around the sun. That CO2 is a warming gas, and we have been pumping extraordinary amounts of CO2, methane, other warming gases into the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution. These are not opinions. But ultimately, and this is maybe the most disappointing part of my comments tonight, ultimately, it's really not about the science. Evolution and climate change deniers are not likely to change their opinions just because we shovel more facts on top of them. I've been working in the creation and evolution issue for over 30 years, actually, 27 of them at the National Center for Science Education. I know that just adding more facts to the incredible amount of factual information supporting evolution doesn't convince someone that evolution is valid science if they have an ideological reason to doubt it. The science is necessary, but it's not sufficient. This is because denialism of science is rooted primarily in ideology and culture, and these are not easily changed, certainly not by just shoveling up more facts. There is sufficient research to suggest that people happily reject factual information if it agrees with preconceptions or strongly held views. In other words, if it disagrees with their ideological concerns. Science matters, but it's not sufficient. The science is not going to be listened to if people have their fingers jammed in their ears. What keeps the fingers jammed in the ears is the belief that something very important is going to be lost if the other guy is right. To anti-evolutionists, if evolution is true, they believe, because they believe in a seamless Bible from the first verse of the creation through the fall of Adam and Eve to the resurrection of Jesus to the end times in Revelations. They believe this is a seamless whole. If any part of it is wrong, you have to chuck out the whole lot. So if evolution is true, that means the Bible's wrong. The Bible is wrong, there is no God, there's no salvation, there's no moral rudder to tell you what is right and what is wrong. They also would lose their whole social support to accept evolution. There are lots and lots of reasons why a conservative Christian isn't going to accept the science. The fingers are jammed pretty firmly into the ears. For global warming contrarians, global warming alarmists will weaken the economy, they will harm national security, require compromises in individual liberty, and result in a socialist big government takeover. If these concerns are not assuaged, all the science in the world is not going to be convincing. For opinions to change requires two things. The consequences of changing an opinion cannot be too great, and the bearer of the opposing view has to be someone trusted by the recipient. Who can assuage these ideological concerns so that the consequences are not going to be unacceptable? Well, it's going to have to be people from that same ideological tradition, because they are the ones that the listener is going to trust. This is why evangelicals who accept climate change are so very valuable, because they can go to their fellow conservative Christians and say, look, I'm still a believer, I'm still, a faithful Christian. Here is how I deal with the theological issues, and now let me tell you about the science. You've got to deal with the ideological issues before the fingers will come out of the ears. If the fingers come out of the ears, the science has a really good chance, because the science is so good for both of these fields. Similarly, for the political conservatives, those Republicans who do accept the science, and there's a growing number of them. Unfortunately, in the United States these days, it's a bit of a struggle to be a moderate or liberal Republican, but I have great confidence in evolution. Hoping things will happen. There are other situations where people reject scientific conclusions, such as the anti-vaccination campaign, which, in my opinion, is not really the same thing as denying the value of science. I don't find the creationists or the anti-global warming folks, the global warming deniers, to be anti-science. They're just anti-this science and that science. They're not anti-science as a whole. And people basically really like science. We like what science does for us. We like the stuff we get from science. We like that grandma got a new hip and she's able to garden again. There's a lot of good things. Polls in the United States, at least, show that scientists are right up there with firemen in terms of admired occupations. If you're up there with firemen, what more can you say? So let me leave you with these general thoughts about denialism as I understand them, and the two areas, evolution and climate change, in which I am most familiar. I suspect that the pillars of denialism, of attacking the science, having an ideological foundation for the denial, and a cultural foundation, these two interact with one another certainly. I bet you those could be extended to other examples, like maybe the anti-vax people, would be the anti-GMO people. There might be some very interesting comparisons to be made there. But I got enough to do trying to deal with the creationists and deal with the anti-global warming people. Speaking of which, there is more information on both of these topics if you go to ncsc.com. As a nonprofit manager, I, of course, have to have a commercial, so go and visit us and learn more about these subjects. And again, I can't thank you enough for inviting me to be part of the Creationism. Thanks so much.